everyone, we're a couple of meeple who played a whole lot of games in 2013.
But not nearly enough.
And we wanted to share our favorites with you since we just started a new year, and it's worth reflecting on some of the great games that have just come out.
Yeah, so I'll get started with our favorite games of 2013. We're kind of going to go back and forth since we have a few different ones on our list.
We've each picked a top five for the year 2013 and an honorable mention because this list was really hard to get down.
Yes.
I also want to caveat this and say that we have not played every game that has come out in 2013, and that is why this is not the best games of 2013. This is our favorite games of 2013.
Exactly. So if there's anything missing from this list that you think we would love based on what we're saying, by all means, leave it in the comments. We probably haven't played it yet.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the games that came out at Essen this year still haven't made their way to the United States. I know that...
Jerks.
I know, Germans.
Wait. Anyway. Wait, they gave us all these board games. We shouldn't be mad at them.
I actually do love Germans. So.
I know.
But things like Lewis and Clark, which I know are coming out in 2014 in the US, has already come out in Europe in 2013. I really want to play that game, and I haven't yet. So This is, of the games that we have played in the year 2013, this is our top 5.
And we're American, so deal with it. So I guess I'll get things started then. My honorable mention for best games of 2013 is actually Viticulture, for a couple of reasons. One, I love worker placement games. Two, I love me some vino. And this one, I really thought the mechanics worked really well with the theme. I wouldn't recommend actually drinking wine while playing Viticulture, because if you have like a full 6-player game going, it can get a little weird.
It's a different way to lose, being drunk.
Yeah. Or win, depending on your perspective. Anyway, what's your honorable mention?
My honorable mention is a really simple card drafting game called Sushi Go. It's basically like Seven Wonders, only instead of building a civilization, you're pulling sushi off of one of those little like rotating sushi cafe conveyor belt things, and you're taking a card from a hand, passing it to the next player, and trying to score points for all the different types of adorably cute sushi that you play in front of you.
Art is fantastic in that game. It is so adorable. You have smiling pudding. Smiling pudding, everybody.
You're smiling pudding.
I know. So, on the topic of smiling pudding, not really. My number 5 would have to go to Caverna, the Cave Farmers. I finally got a copy of that for Christmas, and I was so excited. But that one is about building a cave family with dwarves, and I love dwarves almost as much as I love wine. I have a problem. When you're done with a game, you can go look back on your board and look back on everyone's board who's played with you and say, like, oh, you built a beer parlor. Like, oh, you built, like, the cuddle room, which is for animals, by the way, not for people.
Or dwarves.
Or dwarves, true. And every time you play, you can have a completely different strategy based on who you're playing with. I also love the way the game scales up or down. Like, we play a lot of 2-player of Caverna, but even if we have people over for game night, like 3 or 4, even 5 or 6 players, you get a totally different experience. I didn't put it higher on my list, mostly because we play a lot of 2-player, and I feel like the better experience is with more players. So since this is a channel mostly about 2-player games and playing games for couples, it's a little bit lower on my list. I also wish there were a little bit more variety to the cards, because if once you know like what actions are coming up in that game, I feel like you can kind of, after you've played a few times, you kind of like, I don't know, like it's good and bad.
My number 5 is actually an expansion. It's not a full game. It is Race for the Galaxy: Alien Artifacts. Now, there's a lot of love-hate about this expansion for what it introduced. There's obviously the new cards, and the new cards introduced a whole lot of emphasis on alien cards, and it made Uplift a legit strategy. It also introduced some new stuff like variable scoring planets and whatnot. So if you're a Race for the Galaxy fan, you know, if you love that game, the new cards should be an auto buy. But the sort of new game that it introduced, sort of like a mini game that adds like a board spatial element where you build this alien space station out of these cards that have like grids on them. I don't know what it was, but it clicked something in my head that made me say that Alien Artifacts Orb game is the definitive way to play Race for the Galaxy. Race for the Galaxy was good before, but when you add in the ability to move your explorers around a map and build this alien space station that's like ever changing and ever shifting as your little astronauts like go and explore it and find alien artifacts and technology. There's just something so cool about that. And the fact that the designer Tom Lehman was able to like construct a exploration geographic puzzle into the core rules of the game just kind of blows my mind. The reason it's not higher for me is I felt that the orb game is a little counterintuitive to learn. The rules for the card placement is a little strange. And I felt that the cards that come in it, because the expansion is not compatible with the other expansions, kind of skews the base deck with the new expansion cards in it really heavily towards alien and really heavily towards military. And I feel like an economic engine is not quite as doable as it was in previous expansions. So it does limit the card pool that you can play with, but still really good.
I'd have to agree with a lot of that. I'll get to that, though, because I actually rated it a little bit higher on my list.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. But for number 4, I actually put Sushi Go up in my top 5. And the reason is that I kept coming back to this game this year. A lot of my friends and family who maybe don't necessarily play board games and don't understand why I'm into them, I found that I kept coming back to this one and using it as an example, and it's so easy to pick up and play and teach other people. And just because like the theme and the idea of like passing cards around in a circle, and it's just like the sushi go round as we used to call it back in college, just that people understand it and just love the artwork, and it always guaranteed like some fun interaction, so that's why it's a little bit higher on my list.
My number 4 is a game that we've also already talked about, and that's Caverna, the Cave Farmers. It's good. It's really good. I had never played Agricola, so I didn't quite know what to expect. You know, Uwe Rosenberg is a bit of a deity in certain circles in board gaming, especially Eurogaming. So this is my first Rosenberg game, actually, that I had ever played to completion, and I really enjoyed it. I like you. I love the theme of, starting a dwarf family. I love how open-ended it is. There's just, the box is massive. It just comes with so much cardboard.
So many pieces.
Yeah.
So many pieces.
It's crazy. And all of the pieces, all of the little like resources are shaped like the resource they are. The wheat is shaped like little wheat stalks. The vegetables look like pumpkins.
I think one of the first times we played it, I actually turned to you and said, like, wouldn't it be easier if you just had dials for all these things? And you were like, what's the fun in that?
Exactly. Like I said, it's a tangible experience with those pieces. And there's just so many options. I mean, you can focus on your cave, and I've played games where I've made like a really in-depth cave full of mines and rooms and packed it as full of as many dwarves as possible. And then other games I've focused on the farming and getting tons of animals. And it's just really open-ended, and it's kind of like an open-ended puzzle, a competitive open-ended puzzle. And there really isn't too many experiences like that feel like you can do whatever you want and still be successful at it. It doesn't really punish players for their strategy. It allows for exploration. It allows for, trying different things and being able to do it and stay competitive. So it's really good. Like you, the reason it's not higher on my list is because 2-player game is good. 4-player game is really good, and I still haven't played it with higher than 4 players, but I suspect that when you add the 5-player board and the 7-player board into it, I suspect that it is truly excellent. One of those games that gets better with the more that you play it with.
So moving on to my number 3, it's actually another game we've already talked about. Wow, it's like we should just call this the Deja Vu episode. Number 3 on my list is actually Race for the Galaxy Alien Artifacts, and one of the games that actually got me into playing board games and card games was Race for the Galaxy. I had a friend who introduced it to me, and I became addicted. And I must have refreshed the thread on Board Game Geek about alien artifacts 357,000 times in the year 2013, waiting for alien artifacts to come out. And I finally just gave up and just said, it's vaporware, like, it's not gonna happen. And then we were standing in a board game cafe one night, and this one over here actually turns to me and goes, isn't that Alien Artifacts? And I screamed, like, in the middle of the cafe and was like, I must own this right now. And then I just ran over to the cash register and got it immediately. It's actually higher on my list because this expansion, more than any other expansion for the base game for Race to the Galaxy, has changed the gameplay so much, but in such, like, a great way. Like, it's completely made it a different game. And there are people who, like, say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I really feel like this adds a completely different layer to an already excellent game. It makes me think in a way that I never had to think about in the first game. Because I got pretty good at Race for the Galaxy. Like, I was beating this one over here, like, every time we played. And then we busted out Alien Artifacts, and now I think it's pretty even. But he can get me with the uplift and with the alien strategies going. So I completely loved it. I fell in love with it. Especially playing for 2 players. That's something that we break out pretty often.
So now it gets a little bit different. This is where sort of our taste in gaming kind of diverges a little bit. And maybe comes back together and diverges again, like some sort of double helix of gaming taste. My number 3 is 1775 Rebellion, which is a really elegantly simple war game by Academy Games, the guys who did 1812, The War of Canada, and a ton of other games as well. But 1775 Rebellion it's great. It's about the American War of Independence against the British. It plays 2 to 4 players. I think it plays equally well with 2 to 4 players. Each player will take either one side of the war, so either the British or the American side, and the other player will take the other. And if you're playing with more than 2 players, each side has 2 factions. There's the British Army, the Redcoats, and there's the Loyalist militias. And if you're playing on the American side, there's George Washington's Continental Army and the Patriot militias. So if you're playing 2 players, you actually control 2 factions that get their own turn and action phase. And you're basically fighting for control with little tiny colored wooden cubes across the 13 colonies of the American East Coast. And it's just very simple. It's very easy to teach. But it's also really exhilarating and hilarious because there's a chance with every die roll in combat that your troops run away from the battle. So you get ridiculous things like, oh, I've moved an army of 6 cubes into Pennsylvania to take it over against 1 cube of the enemy, and you roll the dice and all your troops run away.
Like, ah!
From the one guy hiding in the woods.
I like to imagine that they run with their arms flailing behind them, like a bunch of pansies.
Yes, you have to imagine the cube with little arms running.
Yes,
yeah.
That makes it better.
But it's great. I mean, the turn order is random every turn, and you always play a card on your turn to see how far you can move, and there's special cards that you can play to change the game, but it plays very smoothly. It's very easy to teach. It's a very low complexity war game that at the same time is really fun, really nicely produced. It's just such a colorful board with all the cubes and the spaces, and it's just got great gameplay. I would recommend it to anyone who wants a little historical flavor in their gaming collection, but doesn't like high complexity craziness with their war games. It's just stellar.
That's a really excellent way of putting it. Now I feel terrible for not putting it on my list at all, but that's where we differ. So number 2, actually, our number 2 is the same.
It's the same. We both picked the same number 2.
So we actually picked Pathfinder, the adventure card game.
Yes, from Paizo. It is basically an RPG in a box played with cards.
Yeah.
No DM needed.
No.
The game runs itself.
Some pretty epic fantasy characters. There's like a dwarf. There's like an elf ranger type.
Dwarf ranger.
That's right.
There's a druid, a halfling bard, which is what I'm playing in our campaign.
Yeah.
And that's the key word there, is that this game can be played as a campaign. So everything you do with your character, who has a deck of all his abilities and weapons and items, is carried over from adventure to adventure. And so you have this persistent experience across a bunch of different gaming sessions with your character, and they grow and they get new stuff, and you work together with your party. It's a really fun group game. We play once a week about.
Yeah, and I found that actually with this game we've come pretty close to dying, but never quite there. So I think they've balanced it in a way that the different decks are offered just enough challenge and just enough surprise to keep you going, keep you interested, but it's not so crazy hard that you can't beat it.
It's not table-flippingly frustrating.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a sure way, by the way, to get yourself kicked off this top 5 list for 2014, is to be table-flippingly frustrating.
Exactly. But why don't we talk about why it's so high on our list?
Yeah, well, it's high because it plays well with any number of players. It's high because it has great production values. I mean, you get just a ridiculous number of cards in the base game, and then every other month they've been releasing an expansion that adds, I would say, anywhere between 10 to 15 hours of game content per pack, and all 3 of those packs have already come out, so it's probably another 45, 60 hours of gameplay just in the expansion, the bi-monthly expansions that they release.
Yeah, and there's a high level of customization for your character. They offer a lot of different abilities that you can pick as you go throughout the campaign, where you're not just stuck with, standard upgrades for, the dwarf ranger, like doesn't just get like a better bow. Like, you can actually pick and choose your abilities as you go along. So I love that.
Yeah, and it's there's randomness to the game, obviously, but and funny things can happen, and the enemies that you can get will be wildly different from scenario to scenario. But it's a good time. It's a bunch of people sitting around a table having a story happen that they get to be a part of, which is for both of us something really important for games.
Right. Like right now in the campaign we're running, you're playing a halfling bard, and I think that there's a couple times where your charm couldn't quite get you out of the situation, so you literally just like slammed the door in the face of something.
Yeah, not so good at combat, my bard, but really good at running away and shutting doors on enemies that are chasing me.
And finding twin ladies to hang out with.
That's
and
right.
Shove in front of enemies.
It's the high charisma.
It's fantastic. I know, for me personally, it's so high because we've had a lot of great experiences coming out of that game.
Yeah, it's not very deep, it's not very complex, but it is very fun, and that is really important, especially when you're with a group.
Yeah. So our number 1 choice, this is where we wildly differ.
Again.
I don't even think that my number 1 is on your list at all, and your number 1 is not on my list at all. So do you want to go for your number 1?
Sure, I'll do my number 1. So my number 1 game of 2013 that I've played, my favorite game, is A Distant Plane.
He's getting excited just thinking about it.
I am getting really excited. So A Distant Plane is from GMT Games. It is a game in the Coin series, which stands for Counterinsurgency. It is about the U.S. campaign in Afghanistan after 9/11 to set up a stable government in Afghanistan and get rid of the Taliban. Really heavy theme, obviously. Also a theme, a historical game tackling history that is basically 10 years old, which is really interesting from a design standpoint. But even more than that, mechanically, it is rich and deep and complex, but in a satisfying good way. It's complex. It's 1 to 4 players. Plays best with 4. So there's 4 factions in the game, so each player controls a different faction, and the 4 factions are basically the U.S. military, the Afghani government, the Taliban, and the opium-growing independent warlords of the countryside. And each faction has its own goals and its own victory conditions and its own actions that it can take and its own strategy that it needs to play.
You love yourself some asymmetrical victory
conditions. Asymmetric victory conditions are my favorite thing. And this game is a game built around asymmetric victory conditions and mechanics. And it's 4-player, which is something very rare. You very rarely see 4-person asymmetric games because it's so hard to balance and it's so hard to design. And I think that is why one of the big reasons that it's at number 1 for me is that it's just an amazing example of design. And I've played it probably 4 or 5 times now, full length games. I mean, this is a game that will take you, if you play the long scenario, probably all day to play. We're talking like 6 hours.
And you can play 2-player.
And you can play 2-player. I've played a couple 2-player games of it. I think it's best at 4. It is really fun at 2, but it's a much different game at 2. But it's a very substantial game. This is something you can sink your teeth into, and you can really think about when you're not playing anymore, about what you'll do differently next time, which is always a great sign for a game. Every time I've played it, I've learned something new about the system. I've learned something new about the strategy. I've learned something new about how the game functions, because it's a series of 4 interlocking gears that are all turning in different directions that have to work with each other, and that happens across all 4 factions. And so you get this like wonderful give and take and tug of war and a negotiation and alignment and realignment with other players in the game, trying to win, trying to get over that hump and be the most victorious faction in the game. And it's amazing. It's totally amazing. I'm not going to recommend it for everyone. They're certainly not for everyone. But if you like heavy games and you like deep strategy and you like historical theme and something that'll really make you think, A Distant Plane is by far the best game I played this year.
So with that, actually, my number one is a bit different. My number one, actually, for 2013 is Eldritch Horror, which I love the Lovecraft theme. I loved Arkham Horror. We went for a long period there where we were playing Arkham Horror quite a bit. But what I love about Eldritch Horror is just how much it simplifies and streamlines that game into something a bit more manageable and a little bit less intense and a little bit less up to chance. My die rolling in Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror is notoriously terrible, so that hasn't changed.
That's an understatement, by the way. One time she rolled, she literally needed to roll, like she had 6 dice, and she literally needed to roll 1, 5, or 6, and she rolled all 1s and 2s.
All 1s and 2s. Like, I think sometimes he even does, like, the statistics on my die rolls sometimes, and I just laugh because I just don't understand how they're possible. Anyway, but Eldritch Horror, they've done a really incredible job of making it a little bit easier to wrap your head around. If you've never tried Arkham Horror, I would highly recommend actually trying Eldritch Horror first, before going headlong into that one. It's a little bit of a shorter game, I find. We've played it 2-player, where we each pick 2 characters and then go around, and we've had some pretty epic adventures. But another reason, and I've said this before, why I love games so much is the stories that come out of them. So I feel like this game, more than any game I played in 2013, helped me tell a story and, like, be a part of something where we, save the world from ruin from some crazy nameless thing, and maybe went insane doing it, but had some fun. So one thing that I really love about Eldritch Horror, too, that's a little bit different from Arkham, is the ancient ones. They have their own clues that you have to go search for. So I feel like in Arkham sometimes, if you played it a lot, like we have, you can get some of the same cards and some of the things come up, and it doesn't necessarily work together. But for Eldritch Horror, there are definitely... it makes sense for, like, what's happening in the story. So if you actually, like, read Lovecraft and, like, know those stories well, you'll find that the game actually complements that much better. Eldritch Horror complements it much better, I think, than Arkham Horror. Another main difference between Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror is that they've actually set Eldritch Horror across the globe. So you're traveling across all different locations, so you're saving the entire world from this evil, which is just a little bit more epic, I think, than in this fictional town of Arkham. And another thing is they've streamlined the way because in Arkham some of the turns can take a little bit long. You have to travel somewhere, and then in your next turn, or you can explore or have an encounter there, or you can heal or whatever. But in Eldritch they've combined some of those things. You can take 2 actions on your turn, which actually, like, speeds up the game quite a bit. So it's a little bit less waiting around and a lot more doing, which I really appreciate. So that's why it's my number one.
So those are our top 5 games of 2013 that we've played, our favorites, including honorable mentions. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. We'd be more than happy to talk to you, discuss with you all the different games, maybe your favorites, things that you liked, things that you played that maybe we didn't.
Yeah, I'm sure some of you are listening to this and thinking, like, OMG, how could they not have mentioned this game? It was so amazing. We may not have played it. Maybe we did play it, and there's a reason we don't like it. So, I don't know. Just leave a comment. We'll always take a look. Maybe bring it up in a new show.
Yeah, for sure. And, of course, we thank you for watching and sticking with us through this list episode. And urge you to hit subscribe and tell your friends if they like games.
If you have any tips for me on how I can roll dice better in Eldritch, I would totally appreciate that. But thank you for listening.
And we'll do this again next year.
Okay, bye guys.